Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, addressing all aspects of the digital enterprise, inspiring connection without boundaries and creation without limits. Thank you for tuning in. Here are your hosts, Thom Singer and Craig Brown.
Hello, and welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. This is a new show that has just been started. So if you're listening to this, you are one of the first people probably to have joined into this community. And the idea behind this podcast is we're going to bring you some interviews, some education, and some ideas about what it is for people who work in and around the digital enterprise. My name is Thom Singer, and I have the pleasure to be the co-host of this podcast, along with Craig Brown. Craig, welcome back to our show.
Hi, Thom. It's good to hear you again. Looking forward to our interview today with Adam.
Yeah, I think we have a great interview. And I think what's also is this is going to be released most likely right before Siemens has their conference. And Adam is going to be speaking there. So I'm sure we're going to hear a little bit about what he is going to be talking about. But our guest today is Adam Specht, and he is the product development IT leader for DRiV Inc. Hey, Adam, welcome. Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Hey, Adam, why don't you tell us a little bit about your story? Who is Adam, and what do you do, and how did you get to where you are today?
Well, it's a little bit of an interesting journey. I'm not technically a trained IT person. I came up as a mechanical engineer. I started running Unigraphics back in the mid to late 90s, doing engineering work for a company called Panduit, doing machine design. So after that, graduated from school, started out at a company called Shure Incorporated, doing microphone and audio equipment design work. So I was running ideas actually starting out there and doing primarily mechanical engineering work. Through a number of interesting opportunities, I wound up helping out with their change management processes on a global basis, wound up helping them implement an old PLM tool called Eigner PLM, wound up eventually running their mechanical design group, unimplemented Eigner, implemented Teamcenter PLM, spent some time getting that up and running for their mechanical group, wound up unimplementing Teamcenter, implementing SAP PLM for change management, for managing all of our drawings globally. Mind you, this company had, I think it was 4 or 5 locations around the world. So I got to have a little bit of visibility to that type of a multinational global corporation. So wound up setting up SAP there, kind of crossed all the T's, dotted all the I's there that I felt that I needed to cross, and then wound up jumping over here to what was Federal Mogul to start up their engineering IT practice. And the scope of that really has been working on standardizing their engineering applications globally, whether it's CAD, CAM, analysis software, and also implementing and developing a PLM strategy for them globally. Since I joined the company, we wound up taking me as a Federal Mogul employee, setting ourselves up to spin off as Federal Mogul Motor Parts. And then while we were getting ready to do that, the entire company of Federal Mogul was actually purchased by a company called Tenneco, which was a surprise to all of us. I was actually sitting in Belgium doing a Teamcenter training at the time. I wound up having our lunch there, saw the note come through that we'd been purchased, which was interesting. So what happened from there was Tenneco decided that they were going to take half of Federal Mogul, which was the powertrain division, and keep them as new Tenneco. And they would take the aftermarket and OE friction business from Federal Mogul, the aftermarket business from Tenneco, and spin us off as a new company called DRiV. All the while, they also purchased a company called Öhlins Racing, which does electronic ride suspension. And if you are a dirt bike enthusiast or motorcycle, like motocross kind of enthusiast, you know Öhlins. So it's been a very interesting journey, getting all of that combined. This actually coming to Federal Mogul and then eventually now to DRiV was the first time I've ever done official IT work. My background's always been engineering. So it's been kind of a fun, interesting time to mash all of that up into this, what I'm doing now.
Well, and that's interesting because the more people I meet as I've been involved with the old PLM world and digital enterprise society now, a lot of people who come into these roles didn't come down a direct path. So your story is not that unique in the fact that a lot of people have shared with me that they've sort of taken an indirect path to what they're doing today.
Yeah, very true. I've recognized that myself.
So you're going to be presenting at the Siemens conference, and your title of your speech is How to Avoid a PLM Train Wreck.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit more about what is a PLM train wreck, and then also what you're going to be talking about.
Well, I kind of view it as, if you think back to watching cartoons as a kid, you see a train going down the tracks, and then maybe, Wile E. Coyote's chasing the Roadrunner, and Roadrunner puts something in the middle of the track, and the whole thing just crashes, gets nowhere. So I kind of equate it to that. So what would be a PLM train wreck? Well, a lot of money spent without a whole lot of value returned. A bunch of people trying to make change and not actually getting anywhere and getting the implementation off the ground. So what I'm trying to do with my presentation, and when I talked about my background, I mentioned several PLM implementations that we did, managed to get nowhere, and some that at the end, doing SAP at my last company, we actually managed to get somewhere. Given the challenges of the auto industry and the adventures that I've had recently, we've had some successes and some failures here. So what I'm hoping to do is to talk a little bit about what I found to be successful when making a business case for how do we get people aligned that, hey, we actually want to invest in this thing called product lifecycle management, or PLM. How do we go about talking about a transformation and getting people to actually adopt it, and kind of dealing with some of the things that I've run into over the past 20 years of doing this kind of work. Maybe give some insight to people that don't have that experience, or maybe share some interesting stories with people that do.
Adam, it's Craig. You mentioned the watching the train wreck occur like we used to in those cartoons. Can you give me 3 of the indicators that you just got onto the siding and it's going to be a problem? Maybe some insights as to how do you prevent the train wreck if you sense early enough that there's a problem occurring?
Well, sure. The first one is, and I'll talk about this in my presentation, is how do you gain buy-in? Can PLM be an initiative that is strictly top-down in terms of organizational change management? Can it be something that's truly bottom-up, where everybody rallies around a concept and just naturally the overall organization wants to acquire this new capability or new process or whatever it is? And what I'll talk about is that it really needs to be both. You need to have buy-in across the leadership to say, yes, we actually want to spend the kind of money that's required to do it properly. But if you're just pushing top down and you have all these smart engineers saying, I don't want to use this thing, I don't see any value in it, then they're just going to find ways to work around it. Because again, they're smart people, and me being an engineer, I can say I'm as obstinate as the best of them. If I find something I think works, that's what I want to do. So I'll talk a little bit about that. So that's kind of the overall organizational buy-in. The next piece of it that I really want to talk to is, how do you break up an overarching PLM project and a strategic roadmap so that it's something that is implementable? There's this concept of a big bang approach in saying, all right, we want to have change management, we want to have all of our data managed, we want to do manufacturing, we want to do all of this stuff, this overall vision. And what I found is that if you have too big of a vision, unless you're just strictly a startup that can really start from scratch, the organization, no matter what it is, cannot absorb that. So what I'll talk about is kind of breaking it up into more of a stepped approach, where you're not trying to climb a cliff, but you're actually having a staircase to get to where you want to be. Mm-hmm. And then the third piece of it is really, how do I map out value and an ROI on this? And I've had several conversations over the past couple of weeks, even just talking about things here and saying, anybody that thinks that they can have a strict ROI on a PLM implementation, and they're better off than I am. I don't think that anybody I've ever really talked to has been able to successfully put together an ROI on a PLM project.
And by successful, you mean one that you can measure and prove?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So, when you talk about PLM, you're talking about mitigating risk proactively, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about adding efficiencies into an organization. And all of these things, they're great things, but it's very, very difficult to tie dollar values to it, right? And if I start talking about efficiency and present that to an executive, I've always been laughed out the door. They don't want to hear anything about, oh, well, we think that we can save 10 minutes or 10% of every engineer in the company's time by implementing this. They want tangible numbers. So I'll talk a little bit about how I've gone about making a case for it and those kinds of things.
Good. I want to ask you a different question. So you've been a part of several company transitions, even one that surprised you while you were doing training in Europe. Describe what that's like, both the good and the bad. What's it like to be a part of those consolidations?
Well, there's a lot of uncertainty when it happens. And we're not the only company in town that's gone through this. So I've always viewed it as you have really two paths you can go down. You can sit back and wait for everything to happen. And you can say, oh, all right, once everything happens, I'll find my way and people will tell me what to do. Or you can take the approach of, well, I think this is what needs to happen, and present your ideas and really try and be more proactive about it. I've always been the type of person that I don't work well in companies where there's a strict way to do something, or someone says, well, you must only operate in this box. I'm a little bit ADD, so I wind up wanting to contribute in lots of different areas. And what I've found is that the people that are most successful when they're going through these transitions are the people that put themselves out there and say, you know what? I have an idea. I see the value in doing X, Y, or Z as we proceed through this transition. And so for me, it's been more about explaining what I view as a vision, as a possible strategy, and then really working to partner with people that aren't from your company to help understand what they're going through and incorporate it into your vision.
That's excellent. So I have a question for you about the transition from PLM world to the Digital Enterprise Society. You and I were in some of those meetings, and it's been an interesting transition. Now we're on the doorstep of Realize Live for 2019, and also this new organization called the Digital Enterprise Society. I was pleased to hear that you had become a board member of the new organization. And I would like you to just share your thoughts with us on this transition. Of course, those of us in Detroit know you've been one of our regional users group leaders. Just give us your perspective on the evolution of what maybe you expect to happen.
Well, I've struggled with this a little bit. And I'll be honest, I wasn't sure that I wanted to be involved with the design or the Digital Enterprise Society because I wasn't really sure that it had legs and had the potential to succeed. And I was a little bit starting out, unsure of, getting rid of PLM World and Siemens pulling all of that in. But as I've taken a step back and kind of, wouldn't say meditated on it, but thought about it, over a couple of beers and thinking, hey, I spent a lot of time working on this. what comes next for me? I realized two things. So with Realize Live and Siemens taking over ownership of this whole thing, I see a lot of value in it. And the reason I see the value is because what we're going to be able to see is not just what a small non-for-profit can put together, but really what Siemens has evolved into and really covering the entire breadth of the digital enterprise, right? They whether it is, the ideation of managing requirements for a product, whether it is managing the development process, all of the data that supports that, the analysis tools that go into design, and then extending into the overall manufacturing and execution piece of it. They now have, with Mentor, you have the electronic design tools, you have NX with the mechanical tools, you have this whole SimCenter suite, and there's all of these things that they have. That what the cool thing is they're going to be able to bring to this is it's going to be everything under one roof. So for someone like me, that again, I'm a little bit ADD, I want to take a look at all of this stuff. This presents a great opportunity for me at a conference to be able to see all of these things. A lot of people that have gone to the legacy PLM World conferences, I don't think had the opportunity to go to certain other ones in the industry. But I'll tell you what, I went to the SAP conference. I went to Sapphire once down in Orlando, and the size and scope of what that was able to cover, and it was run by SAP, was amazing. And I'm hopeful that as Siemens gets this really up and running and gets a lot of a couple of events under their belt, that we'll really be able to see start to finish the entire digital enterprise all under one roof. And yes, it'll be one company doing it, but it will be one vision of it, that whether you're leveraging Siemens for all your tools or incorporating other vendors, you'll at least be able to see one concept start to finish. And I'm hopeful that that will really help people as they start to craft their own companies, digital strategies. So as far as the Siemens thing, that's what my thought was on that. As far as the Digital Enterprise Society goes, the thing that really made me want to get involved is thinking about the lack of opportunities people have for becoming educated. So I've had a lot of interesting experiences through my career, but not everyone has the opportunity to work in all of the different strange places that I have. And especially as you start to have these, young kids coming out of school, they know how to run a computer quite well. They run, all of those things just naturally day in, day out. You have all of these, great schools putting out engineering students and whatnot, but I don't see a good way for people to become educated on how to apply that in the real world in the digital enterprise. There, of course, are some programs out there. Purdue has a good one. I've seen some other ones, but there's not a real good way for people to learn about what this stuff is and to share ideas about it. So when I learned about what the vision was for the Digital Enterprise Society, that's what made me want to get involved, is to really hopefully help guide this thing as it gets started, to make sure that it's not just a certification wing for Siemens. I want to make sure that it's an opportunity for everyone to collaborate and learn about what is possible with the context of the digital enterprise. So I'm hopeful. I have a lot of good hope. It has a lot of potential to take off.
Well, I'm quite pleased that people like you are involved. I know a couple of the new board members, and I agree with your summary of why we need it. And I look forward to seeing what you guys pull off. And I'm sort of semi-retired, so I don't mind you calling me and asking for my 2 cents. It's only worth a few cents anyways.
It's at least worth $1, man. Get yourself a credit, and we will take you up on that.
Yeah. So as I think about the next week, it'll be interesting. One of the things that I remembered a lot in our discussions, and then I've dealt with Siemens for almost 20 years, long before they purchased Unigraphics. One of the things that just impresses me to no end, don't anybody forget, this also is a company that builds a lot of products, just like you do at DRiV, just like I used to at General Motors. It's kind of cool having the resources behind you of a real products company. And in their case, all kinds of turbines and windmills and trains and all kinds of other things. It's interesting to me to talk to product development people like you and I in those other divisions of Siemens. And I know when you line interests, a lot of good things happen. It only helps the tool developers inside of Siemens PLM. Any closing thoughts for next week you'd like to share with us?
No, I'm just looking forward to seeing everybody there, and looking forward to seeing what Siemens brings to this thing as a new event.
So Adam, I have a question for you, because you've gone to a lot of these events. We did one of these episodes. I did a whole episode on sort of how to maximize the networking at a conference. As people are going to Realize Live, or if they're listening to this later and they're on their way to some other conference, what's your advice, as far as how people can maximize being present at the conference?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I've been to, I think last year was number 13, so this has got to be probably number 14, I'm guessing, in terms of PLM World or Realize Live. I started out when I was younger going to these, and just sitting back in awe of all of the content that the presenters were presenting. And I became so overwhelmed with that I just needed to go sit in a corner and let myself absorb all of it. But in recent years, I found myself listening to the presentations and taking out a notebook and sitting back and absorbing what they're doing, but then almost just very quickly sketching out how I can apply what I'm learning in these conferences in my real world. So that's how I maximize the specific conference time. Now, in terms of networking, there are people that they're just perfectly happy to go out and talk to a random stranger. And there are people that are not. For those of you that are not, my advice is to go to one of the networking events. There are a lot of people like you that just are not, you're good at sitting and designing in a CAD software, but when you get somebody into a meeting, you're not necessarily as comfortable. Go to the networking event, walk up to somebody and say, "Hi, my name's Adam. What do you do?" And just by doing that, you'll be amazed at the conversations you have. They will realize they're the same as you. You have a lot in common, and you'll go. And maybe you run into somebody that's just as standoffish, but try it again. I'd say 2 or 3 out of 4, you're going to get a good conversation out of it.
Well, and one of the pieces of advice that I give to people is if you go up to somebody, if you're a little bit more introverted and you kind of hate the networking events and you see some people who are standing by themselves, if you walk up and just start the conversation by saying, "God, sometimes I hate these events," they'll be like, "Oh my gosh, me too." And that just starts the whole thing flowing. And then what I said in the episode that I did about how to network, one of the best questions you can ask somebody at an event is, "So why did you come to Realize Live or Connex or whatever event they're at? Why did you come to this event?" And then usually people will tell you their motivation behind being there. And sometimes it gives you like a second motivation. You're like, "Wow, I hadn't thought about that. That's pretty cool." Or the other thing it gives you is a way to help them. If you know they're looking for something and they tell you that they're worried about the train wreck that may be coming in their, in their department, you're like, "Oh my God, have you looked in the agenda? Have you seen Adam Specht's session? He's talking about exactly what you came here to be able to learn." And then they can help guide people guide each other to some of the best education. So that's always a good thing too.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So Adam, one last thing about your presentation. If people are looking through that agenda, and there's a lot of stuff going on at Realize Live, if people are looking through the agenda and they're trying to decide, like between you and something else that same hour, why should they pick your session?
Well, I wouldn't say they necessarily should. I would say that, again, based on why are you at the conference, if you want to hear about PLM and some lessons learned from my war stories, come to check me out. It's I think it's end of the day on Thursday. I'll be presenting. But if there's something else that piques your interest, don't come see me just because I did a podcast. Follow your target topic that you're going after and do that.
Adam, when I realized they put you on Thursday, it just occurred to me that they were saving the best to last. So,
I don't know about that.
Well, Thursday, the last day of a conference, especially a big one, people get kind of tired. For all of you listening out there, this would be worth it. Car companies are dynamic places. The suppliers to us are dynamic places. And when somebody's willing to talk about their successes and advice on how to avoid a train wreck, it's worth going to.
Spoken like
everybody's coming to Detroit, it'll be a kind of a car show anyways. So.
And I was going to say to Craig, spoken like a true former GM employee. So right there.
Yeah, I promise I won't. Being the last one on the last day, I promise I won't put you to sleep. I'll walk around, and if you start nodding off, I'll throw something at you.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Paul Nelson and I, when we would do things together, we would always shoot for that last day because, by then the people that really want to do something are still sticking around. In other words, the people that really didn't want to know, they've already gone. So anyways, it'll be an interesting show. I'm looking forward to it. I plan to be there. There's some habits I can't give up. This is one of them. So I'll be there. Look forward to seeing you.
Well, Adam,
absolutely.
Thank you so much, Adam, for joining us here on the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, for being one of our first guests as we get this show launched. So thank you for being part of it.
Thanks for having me, Thom and Craig.
Hey, the Digital Enterprise Society is a forum for the exchange of ideas for those tools and processes and practice used across the product lifecycle. This podcast is just one of the things that the Digital Enterprise Society is offering to help make it easier for you to navigate your career. If you like the podcast, please let us know. go over to digitalenterprisesociety.org and you can contact us there and let us know what you think about the show. If you have some ideas of some people that we should be interviewing or some topics we should be covering, Craig and I would love to hear that. Craig, any last thoughts?
Oh, just remember, we're all about connecting without boundaries and creating without limits. And enjoy the show next week.
All right, we'll be back next week with another interview. So we hope to see you back here at the Digital Enterprise Society Podcast.
You've been listening to the Digital Enterprise Society Podcast. Learn more about what you've heard here today at digitalenterprisesociety.org. Join us again next